Hey guys, thanks for joining me, and if you like what you see, please subscribe.
Hello, peoples. Welcome to Sharp Ends. Today I'm going to do a teardown and, basic maintenance on this pyrite. This is the basic steel version of it with the steel scales. And I also have the frag pattern one from White Mountain. The other day on a video unboxing of it, I think I might have called it Smoky Mountain. Sorry about that. Wow, there is a large military helicopter passing overhead if I don't mistake. So this has a free spinning pivot, so I need 2 T8s in order to get it started. Sometimes I open these knives with the knife open, and sometimes I do it closed. Today I'm doing it with it closed. It just depends on the mechanism that I'm doing or not doing, the braking and everything like that. So that is free now. Before I actually pull the pivot out though, I'm gonna go ahead and loosen these guys up. These are the back spacers here. You'll see they have barrel spacers. At the back, there's 2 of them. Torx bits, I like to use the Weehaw bits and fasteners, and they have this nice little guy here. These will all be linked in the description below. I also like to take this, I have a toolbar, I have a watch kit. It came with this spring bar tool. You can find them really cheaply as well. And it's just a really nice little poker. And I actually use this part of the poker here for applying lock stick, or thread lock, sorry. So yeah, very useful little tool. So now I remove that, even though I just said I wasn't going to remove it because I'm getting ahead of myself. So these back barrel ones are a little bit smaller. I guess they're T6s. Yeah, they are. And what I'm doing is this is the way that I do it every time. I start with my pivot, and then I work down depending on how many back spacers or barrels or barrel spacers or whatever screws are. I work down from the pivot so I know where I've taken one out, where I need to put one on. I've never taken this one apart before. I did carry it for a while, and then I lent it to a friend while I worked on his knife. And then I just got it back, so now I'm going to do a tear down, see how dirty he kept it. He's actually one of those clean anal freak type dudes. So I don't expect it to be too bad, honestly. So now that's all taken apart. One thing I want to make sure that I'm careful about is that this button lock here has a spring in the back side. Inside of that is a little collar open space. And so when I'm pulling this off, I just need to be careful that I do it very slowly and that I don't send the magnet flying. And here is the button lock with the spring. That looks a little dirty, but we'll clean that all up. Put that up here. And now this should just come apart, but what's wrong? Oh, I think the only thing that's wrong right now is that there's a, forgetting my technical term for this, but this keeps the blade from, this is the back stop for the blade, and the back pin, stop pin for the blade. And I think that there's just a little bit of friction there, keeping that together, although it feels like it's coming from the back, but I've gotten all those out. All right, so I use my squeegee tool here. You probably have one of these if you've ever changed a screen on your iPad or your phone or something like that. Yeah, there we go. I just needed to apply a little, so I put it in here and I applied a little pressure to get it off there without forcing it or anything. So not that bad. Well, a little, yeah, definitely some schmutz in there, right? You notice they did mill this out, even though this knife weighs a ton. And, so this is the steel frame. So there is no liner to this. That is very interesting to me. They didn't need to do a liner. I bet that the Micarta versions and the other versions they're doing of this, they do a liner. So maybe it will be a slightly different construction. Not 100% sure. So I'm going to take some Q-tips and I'm going to take some mineral oil. Sorry, not mineral oil, isopropyl alcohol. And I'm going to clean this off real fast. The alcohol will, you don't even really need to rub it off. The alcohol will just evaporate pretty darn fast. I'm going to clean out and get all the gunk out of the button lock hole. Now, I did oil this, but I just used, I think I probably used hops. I didn't use any of my knife pivot lube stuff. I probably just used hops number 9. It's usually what I use on a budget knife. It's basically just a gun oil in your gun, or lubing up your gun. And I might have over oiled it, I'm not sure, but there was a little bit of oil in the button stop, or maybe, I'm not sure 100%. But the button lock portion of it, you do not want to lubricate. The only part you want to lubricate are going to be the washers and the surfaces that the washers or bearings run on. And that's it. You can see lots of schmutz here. Get a new one. Clean this off. Clean out that hole where the button goes. And you can see on these metal scales, here's where the pin goes in, the backstop pin. And you can see, can you see where the bearings are starting to rub against and make a track around the pivot hole? So as a knife breaks in, that's what happens, and that's totally fine. You'll see here that they have little bearings, and the bearings have stayed in there. Sometimes the bearings fall out when you take the knife off. Sometimes they don't, but we do want to remove those bearings. So I'm going to take them off, but I'm going to remember which side goes which and which side goes out. And I'm going to clean off these bearings really nicely, and I'm going to clean off the track in which they fit. And again, I'm going to keep track of that side needs to be face up, and it's on this side. And this one came out. And I'm going to clean that off nicely. Putting a button lock back together is a little tricky. Actually works out better, I believe, if you put together while it's closed. But lining up the button portion of it with the hole or socket it needs to go into in the mag and getting this springy part here lined up with this hole here and getting it to fit in is sometimes very tricky. So instead of using the hops number 9, since I've torn this down all the way, I'm going to go ahead and use some light KPL. Really do not need much. What's good, the oil helps, sure, it helps it spin, but it also, what it does is it kind of traps any kind of dirt and keeps that dirt from harming the bearings or anything like that. So now the washer is not going to fall out because of tension, surface tension that we've created by putting a little bit of oil down in where the blade fits and where the bearing fits into the blade. All right, so that's clean and put on. And then I just need to remember how this goes back together. I believe that the pivot goes through this hole first. It's interesting. So this pivot has a D. Do you see that D? That D shape there? That's to keep it from free spinning, right? But maybe it's just because this is linerless or the hardware that they had on hand, but the pivot here doesn't have that D receptacle to hold it, so that's why it's free spinning. Very interesting. But again, this is a very cheap knife, and in general, I'm fine with that. Going to close up this alcohol before I spill it, or it all just runs off into the ether. And then I'm going to try to well, I'll almost put this back together. I'm going to go ahead and take the spring out of here, the button lock, and this button lock does have a little schmutz in here, so I'm just going to clean that off. Clean out the inside receptacle part where the spring goes. Good. And again, I'm not going to oil where the spring goes, although it feels like some oil got in there anyway. And that was probably from when I perhaps over oiled the knife when I got it. Sometimes when I get a new knife, I'll drop a little bit of oil on here because of the way this knife is constructed. I feel like I might not have been the best idea. I don't know. All right. So you'll notice that this has to go around the blade. So what I actually need to do is put the spring in here, put the blade on, at the same time as I'm pushing down with the button, and get it all lined up correctly and in its hole. So the blade, the button, or the button lock, has a part that holds the spring, and then a smaller portion in the middle there. And that smaller portion, that little track there, is actually the part that the blade kind of goes in between. And so it looks like you kind of need to put this all together at one, or am I wrong about that? All right, I'm going to take this blade off of here, and I'm just going to put the button on. All right, so now it's in that hole. I'm going to put the blade on. All right, so put the button on first, blade second, and then I'm going to have this partially open to do this, and then the hard part. All right, so now that's holding on there, and if I'm not careful, it's all going to explode on me. I'm going to carefully put the button on there. Good. And then I'm going to worry about the pivot last. And then these back spacers, click on. And now it's on. Great. Now, and this is something I could have done beforehand, but I unfortunately did not. Now I need a little bit of Loctite. And what I'd like to do is, instead of putting the Loctite on the threads of the screws, I like to put it in the nuts on the thread, on the inside nut thread. So again, I'm going to take my lock bar tool and I'm going to put a little bit of Loctite in there. And since this is free spinning, this Loctite is going to do some good. By that I mean it's going to keep the pivot from coming out. In order for Loctite to work, you want to give it 24 hours. So I'm going to test the tension on this, or the make sure that there's no blade play, and then I'm going to let it sit for 24 hours before I do anything else. Then I'll strop this up, and I'll check to see if I need to sharpen it. Probably won't sharpen it though. It's interesting that they were using a part here with that D shape for the pivot for it to be non-free spinning, but it doesn't actually have the hole for it. I find that interesting. And again, because I know where I put the screws in a certain order, I know which ones go to which. Button locks are really easy to center. Basically, you just need to tighten it down, and because the action of the button lock doesn't have any, or the detent, if you will, the detent doesn't have any sideways play like a liner lock would or a frame lock, then the centering is usually just perfect on its own, and you don't really have to worry about it. But we can see right here, and this is something I should have checked beforehand, is like how centered it was, but it's perfectly centered again. It's not something with a button lock that I'm ever usually worried about. Interesting thing about the Pyrite, something about the washers, you can actually feel the knife turning. It's a little bit tight, so I'm just going to loosen the pivot just a fraction of a hair. And yeah, when you clean it, you can actually feel the bearings rolling. It's a little cheap, I gotta admit, but it's still a great knife, and it's super cheap. Cool. So that was a teardown and maintenance of a pyrite. Now I will take this, and in order to keep it sharp, I always take my knives and I strop them after every couple of uses. And I also like to sharpen them on my KME sharpening system when they get dull. What I think is dull in general is when they will no longer scroll cut through a piece of paper, although sometimes I run them much longer past that. But once they start catching and not cutting a piece of paper at all, I tend to want to sharpen them. I'm just taking a little bit more alcohol, cleaning off the blade and everything like that. So that was the disassembly of the pyrite. Just the only tricky part is when you're putting it back together, make sure that you put the button in first, then the blade, and then tighten everything up. And don't forget to put your Loctite in first before you start assembling it. That was a little mistake of mine. Thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your support and all your likes and your subscriptions. If you liked what you saw today, you can also join me on Instagram. I have lots of other pictures and videos over there. And if you want to support the channel, you can join me on Patreon or become a channel member. Links in the description for anything that I post here today. Also support the channel, but you're not obligated under any form or fashion to use them. If you do, I don't mind. Thanks, guys, and I'll see you next time on Sharp Ends. Bye-bye now.